To many in the West, it is treated as the Jewish alternative to Christmas, but nothing could be further from the truth. Others call it the Festival of Lights, but in Hebrew, it is simply called Hanukkah. But what is Hanukkah, and where does its observation originate? The term Hanukkah comes from the Hebrew word for dedication, specifically appearing in connection to the sanctifying of the altar of Yahuwah, the creator of heaven and earth. We first see the term in the Torah, the books of Moses, in Bamidbar, Numbers chapter 7. Zot Hanukkah HaMizbeach Vayom HaMashach. This is the dedication of the altar in the day of its anointing. The custom of observing Hanukkah annually, however, is not commanded in the Torah. In fact, the Hanukkah celebration, as kept today, is not found within the Hebrew canon of the Tanakh, referred to as the Old Testament by Christianity. The reason for this is because Hanukkah is a historic celebration commemorating events that transpired in the 2nd century BC that took place after the canonizing of the Hebrew Tanakh. However, the Greek canon of the translated Hebrew text, known as the Septuagint, does contain the history of Hanukkah in the books of the Maccabees, which was originally included in the King James Version of the Bible. In the 4th century BCE, Alexander the Great spread Greek culture by conquest and colonization throughout the regions surrounding the Mediterranean. By the age of 30, he had created one of the largest empires of the ancient world, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. Alexander built cities for religious and political means on the ruins of empires he had destroyed. The effects of his conquest would create a cultural shift that would change the world. This cultural shift is known as Hellenization. This term comes from the Greek word Hellas, which was the original name of Greece. The Hellenization process promoted a universal concept of culture by blending Greek philosophies, traditions, and language with the conquered lands. This made the entire region a literal melting pot of religion, science, art, and music. This shift was celebrated by many and welcomed by most. For the Yahudim, who are called Jews, however, the Hellenization process would largely be rejected. 400 years prior, they had returned to their ancestral homeland from Persia, having been exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, sovereign of Babel. The book of Ezra records edicts from Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia, who all gave edicts for the rebuilding of the temple of Yahuwah, the one and only creator of heaven and earth, in Jerusalem. The first temple had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar's siege against Jerusalem. The temple was originally built and dedicated by King Solomon and was a true marvel of architecture. The rebuilding of the temple was a monumental effort for the Yahudim, especially in the wake of re-establishing their nation. The temple was a colossal structure with panels overlaid with gold furniture, and exquisite tapestries. The treasury rooms of the temple were filled with gold and silver. The rebuilding of the temple and the return from the exile were already prophesied to take place by the prophet Daniel previously. The Yahudim clearly had favor with the kings of the earth and also with the King of heaven. Despite this, however, many Jews at this time became Hellenized, participating in various Greek traditions and even adopting Greek names. This would only worsen when the unexpected death of Alexander the Great took place in 323 BCE. Alexander had no heir to his throne, therefore he divided his reign with his 4 generals. For this reason, the prophet Daniel had previously been shown in a vision the nation of Greece represented as a leopard having 4 heads. Seleucus ruled over Asia Minor, Syria, and Babylonia, and later Yehuda or Judea. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 verse 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then died, and his servants bare rule everyone in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome. and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. While in the land of Babylon, the prophet Daniel was given a vision depicting the destruction of Media Persia at the hand of Alexander the Great. This very war is enshrined in the Alexander mosaic to this very day, where we can see a depiction of Alexander the Great coming against Darius III and his empire. Daniel was given this vision way before it even took place. This is very important. In the book of Daniel, or Daniel chapter 8, we see that the Medo-Persian Empire is represented as a ram with two horns, which is attacked and destroyed by a goat that has a single horn. According to the book of Daniel chapter 8, this is the country of Greece and its first king. We read this in the book of Daniel chapter 8, verse 20. The ram which you saw having two horns are the sovereigns of Media and Persia, and the male goat is the sovereign of Greece. And the large horn between its eyes is the first sovereign, who is Alexander the Great. And that it was broken and four stood up in its place are four rulerships arising out of that nation, but not in its own power. And in the latter time of their rule, when the transgressors have filled up their measure, a sovereign fierce of face and skilled at intrigues shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy incredibly, and shall prosper and thrive, and destroy mighty men and the Kodesh, the set apart people, speaking of the Yahudim, the Jews. This is a prophecy concerning Antiochus Epiphanes when he would destroy Jerusalem and the people of Yahuwah. The prophet Daniel has been shown before it even took place what would transpire. Further, we read in the book of Daniel chapter 8 that he would put an end to the continual sacrifices that are done, that he would pollute the sanctuary, and that he would even make the messengers in the heavens stumble at the works which he was doing on the earth. And we will talk about those in just a moment. The book of Maccabees chapter 1, the first book of Maccabees, Maccabean chapter 1, tells us what took place to allow these events to transpire. In the book of Maccabees chapter 1, verse 11, we read, "In those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise, or a gymnasium, at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the Kodesh, the set apart covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief." A gymnasium in the ancient world was not just a place where you went and exercised. This was a place where you were educated in the mystery religions of the Greeks, where you would learn about their deities and pay homage to them, and you would perform naked in front of them, supposedly for their amusement. Therefore, the children of Israel were blaspheming against Yahuwah, making themselves indecent, making themselves uncircumcised. And they were doing this in the very place where Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, said that his name would be forever, and that is Jerusalem. A century and a half after the death of Alexander, Antiochus Epiphanes became king over the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus Deho Epiphanes is the name he bestowed upon himself, literally meaning the deity made manifest. His original name was Mithridates, meaning gift of Mithras, one of the deities of ancient Persia, which the Greeks also worshipped and is still worshipped in the Zoroastrian religion to this day. Mithras was one of the Persian versions of Sol Invictus, which was adopted by the Hellenistic pantheon as the deity of the sun. Clearly, Antiochus believed he was a deity, as can be seen in coins minted by him and depicting him seated on the throne of Zeus. He was sometimes called Epimanes, meaning madman, a play on the word Epiphanes. This was done by people in his empire because they knew that he was insane. Since the reign of Antiochus III, the father of Antiochus Epiphanes, the Jews, the Yahudim, had enjoyed extensive autonomy under the high priest. They were divided into different parties, namely two: the Hashmonim, or the Hasidians, which were the pious ones, the ones who guarded the Torah and kept the covenant, and a Reform party, which favored Hellenism. For financial reasons, Antiochus Epiphanes supported the Hellenized Jews. According to 2nd Maccabees, a Hellenized Jew by the name of Yahushua renamed himself Yason, or Jesus, the name which gives us Jesus, and purchased the position of high priest from the Greek king Antiochus. The rightful high priest was displaced by the power of the king. Jason, or Jesus, built a gymnasium in Jerusalem to introduce the Greek mode of educating young people and created customs opposed to the Torah. In ancient times, the gymnasium was a place to worship and participate in various games in the nude. Jason, or Jesus, even donated large sums of silver to the sacrifice of the Greek deity Hercules, as recorded in the book of Maccabees. His brother Melanius purchased the right to be high priest behind his back from the king. Jason, or Yason, Jesus, he was so angry that he attacked the city of Jerusalem, slaying many of his own countrymen. He did this because he thought Antiochus had died fighting against Ptolemy for the reign of Egypt, or Mitzrayim. This commotion, however, was perceived by Antiochus as a revolt because he did not die in Egypt. Therefore, Antiochus marched upon Jerusalem. Within 3 days, he had slaughtered 40,000 Yahudim, including women and children, along with the elderly. He sold about the same number into slavery. Melanius, the priest, guided Antiochus to the location of the Kodesh, the set-apart vessels and gifts that had been given by kings to the temple of Yahuwah. Antiochus left with 1,800 talents of gold, which he plundered from the temple. Antiochus changed the name of Jerusalem to Antioch after his own name. In the writings of the historian Josephus Flavius, who is also a Kohen, a priest of the Yahudim, the Jews, we read, in the Jewish war, the king being there to dispose beforehand, complied with them, and came upon the Jews with a great army, and took their city by force, and slew a great multitude of those who favored Ptolemy, and sent out his soldiers to plunder them without mercy. He also spoiled the temple, and put a stop to the constant practice of offering a daily sacrifice of expiation for the 3 years and 6 months. The events that transpired during the first Hanukkah will be repeated in the last days. As the old saying goes, history has a way of repeating itself, and we know this to be true, especially in the scriptures. We see that events repeat themselves time and time again. The book of Maccabees takes place during that period between the prophet Malachi and the book of Matithyahu, during that gap of time. So it is very important because this fills in many gaps in history for those who are unaware of the lesson of the Maccabees. And those of you who are familiar, you could still learn many things by studying the accounts year after year. In 1st Maccabean, or Maccabees, chapter 1, we read in verse 41,
Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. You see, this was seen as a multicultural melting pot where everybody had an equal opportunity to be one people, and you could be equal with the Greeks. No matter what your status in the empire was, you could now be a Greek citizen. You see, and it seemed on the surface to be very innocent. People like this idea today, the idea of having a melting pot of culture and religion and politics and being open-minded and progressive and staying with the times and moving and changing laws and changing ideas and changing those long-held perspectives. That today, if you have those kind of ideas, the idea of being singular, the idea of having your own religion or your own point of view, and it has anything to do with the scriptures at all, then there is always a problem. It's always a problem. If you believe in the scriptures, if you promote the idea of Yahuwah Elohim and his Torah, then you will be persecuted. People will be against you, just as they were at this time, you see, because the Yahudim did not go along with this commandment of the king. Some of them did, as we're going to read, but not all of them. And this is because essentially the king's warning was to forsake the Torah, because the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, are often called the law. It means the instructions, but it is also the law, the constitution for the people of Yahuwah. So therefore the king's requirement was that they forsake the Torah given by Yahuwah. You see, Yahuwah's laws are not like the laws of the nations. They're very specific, but the laws of the nations are very similar. They have similar sacrifices, similar deities, similar idols. All these things are very similar. So a synchronicity was being formed within the Greco Empire. And we see that this synchronicity was used to persecute the way of Yahuwah. It says further, it says, and many of the Israelites consented to this religion and sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Shabbat, the Sabbath. You see, this is a key to the understanding here. This whole event is transpiring because of compromise. Because the people of Yahuwah, some of them compromised along the way. They wanted to be like the other nations. They envied the way of the other nations. And so therefore, at the first opportunity to compromise, they had compromised. You see, this idea of Hellenization still exists today. It is a mindset. It is something where you have accepted a multicultural concept that allows you to somehow slip and slide into other perversions that lead you away from Yahuwah and worshiping false deities and breaking the Sabbath and doing all these things. It says further, for the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Yehudah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple of Yahuwah. And they should profane the Sabbaths and the festival days and pollute the sanctuary and the Kodesh people. And they set up altars and groves. Now, groves are called asherim in the Hebrew language. These are sacred trees. The scriptures tell us that the ancient pagans, the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, and all the people in the region, that they set up evergreen trees and that they put abominations under every green tree. And the Israelites would also fall into this abomination time and time again. This is also referenced by the prophet Yirmiyahu, who says that the heathen would cut down evergreen trees and bring them into their home and decorate them with gold and silver. Does this sound familiar? This was what was happening. And Yahuwah says this was a pollution on the land. That the heathen, the Greeks, were setting up these altars, these sacred trees, and it says further, chapels of idols, and sacrificing swine's flesh, which is to'ebah, or abomination, according to Yahuwah Elohim. An unclean beast, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with the manner of uncleanliness and profanation. to the end that they might forget the Torah, the law, and change all of the ordinances. And whoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. Anyone who would not break the covenant of Yahuwah would be put to death according to the king. Very important to grasp what is taking place, because again, what is being said, get with the times. Things have changed. The Sabbath is no longer important. There's a new way. There's no reason to eat clean, eat kosher. There's no reason to not have swine sacrificed on the altars. Because people say today that pigs are now somehow clean. And they'll say, well, the reason that the pig was unclean back then is because, they didn't have the ways, the sanitation that we have today. Even though when you look at the footage of butchering that takes place in these places where they do this, these swine today, where they slaughter the swine, it is done in a way that is more disgusting than it's ever been in human history. But somehow now it's different. Things have changed. The Almighty doesn't care. It's all about compromise. Let's all be one people, a new world order, a coming together of all people and blending all cultures and perspectives. And if you don't agree, then you are narrow-minded. You are the problem. This is how it was, and we see in our culture today that this is the direction that we're heading now. In the name of multiculturalism, in the name of diversity, in the name of a multitude of religions and philosophies and ideas, the people are beginning to turn against the word of Yahuwah and persecute the word of Yahuwah in the name of tolerance. We see it is happening. Verse 54. It says, now the 15th day of the month of Kislev, or Kaslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation. This is a very key passage here. The abomination of desolation was set up. Now, remember this. The abomination of desolation is going to be a very important term. So they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar and built an idol altar throughout the cities of Yehuda on every side. Now, in Daniel, we parallel this idea of the abomination of desolation because it was prophesied first by Daniel the prophet, Daniel the prophet. In chapter 11, verse 31, it says, and strongholds shall arise from him, talking about Antiochus, and profane the Kodesh place, the set apart place, the stronghold, and shall take away that which is continual, speaking of the everlasting Tamid offering, the perpetual offerings that took place every day in the temple. He took that away. He brought an end to it and set up the abomination that lays waste, or the abomination of desolation. And by flatteries he shall profane those who do wrong against the covenant. But the people who know their Elohim shall be strong and shall act.
The abomination of desolation was a huge idol of Jupiter. Jupiter, or Jupiter, literally comes from Deu, meaning deity, and Pater, which means father. So essentially his name means the Almighty Father. And he had many extraordinary savior-type sons, such as Hercules. The Greek form Zeupater literally means Zeus Pater, or Father Zeus, which Zeus was the name that the Romans would call Jupiter later. The Sanskrit form is Diaspater, simply meaning Heavenly Father. So we see that he had all these generic names and titles, that he is the Almighty Father, the Heavenly Father. He is identified with the brightest of the superior planets, which in Latin is called Jovis Stella, but today in the English language it is called Jupiter. In the region of Canaan and Babylon, he was identified as Baal or Baal. Time and time again, Yahuwah had warned the Israelites against worshiping Baal, and yet time and time again we see that they fell into the snare of idol worship. Baal was also phonetically called God in Babylon, the literal name of their deity of fortune, as mentioned in the book of Isaiah 65, verse 11.
This deity of fortune, who is called by the Babylonians God, is identified as Baal and Baal God in the Hebrew book of Joshua or Yahushua, and referred to as Baal Gad or Baal God in the English translations to this very day. Baal or Baal was a simple word meaning Lord or husband. So to the Greeks and Romans, he was simply the Almighty Father, which in their language they said Jupiter. To the Babylonians, however, he was simply Lord or Baal, or a fortune deity, which they called God. Yahuwah, however, is not Jupiter, Zeus, Baal, or God. Yahuwah is, and there is none else. He says that he is very territorial for his namesake. He doesn't give his esteem to another or to idols. But the king insisted that all come together for the common good and worship the heavenly Father, which he called Jupiter. According to the Babylonian Talmud, Antiochus banned that the name of Yahuwah, Yod-He-Wah-He, should even be vocalized. To say the name would be an immediate death penalty. To this day, the name is not widely pronounced. The name Yahuwah is his identity. It is his zakar. It is his memorial to every generation. When one vaguely says Lord, Master, Father, or the like, it is just as the ancient pagans did with their deities. Antiochus renamed the temple of Yahuwah and called it the temple of Jupiter. There he offered a swine on the altar, as was the habit of those who worshiped Baal or Baal, because legend states that he was gorged by a boar. Therefore, swine are offered to appease him. There was prostitution and all manners of abomination that took place in the temple according to the books of Maccabees. Yahuwah allowed all this to take place as he said he would, because his people had become idol worshippers, just like the heathens all around them, and they wanted to be like the other nations. Therefore, he showed them the evils of Greece firsthand. If Yahuwah's people had remained righteous, Antiochus would have been struck down before he could have ever done any of these atrocities. According to 3rd Maccabees, Jews who wanted to join themselves to the Greeks had to accept the son of Zeus, which was Bacchus or Dionysus, whose name means from Zeus as their personal Lord and Savior, and be branded or marked with the sacred symbol of the ivy of Bacchus, an ancient foreshadowing of the mark of the beast of the last days. Bacchus or Dionysus was said to be reborn during the winter solstice every year, just as Mithra and Tammuz of Babylon. All of these practices are abominations according to the scriptures. On the king's birthday, which happened to be the 25th, every month they would have a huge sacrifice in which the king would have Torah observant Jews killed by burning them with their Torah scrolls, hanging their infants from nooses, and worshiping Jupiter amongst all the other mighty ones of the pantheon of the Greek Empire. Antiochus Epiphanes poured out his wrath in ways that we cannot even understand on the children of Yisrael. One of the most barbaric acts of cruelty that he did that we read about in the book of Maccabees can be found in 2nd Maccabees chapter 7, starting in verse 1. It came to pass also that 7 brothers with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the Torah, the law of Yahuwah, to taste swine's flesh, the flesh of pigs. And they were tormented with scourges and whips. But one of them spoke first and said, "What would you learn from us? We are ready to die rather than to transgress the law of our fathers." Then the king, being enraged, commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot. For with being heated, he commanded to cut out the tongue of him that spoke first, and to cut off the utmost parts of his body, the rest of his brothers and his mother looking on. Now when he was thus maimed in all his members, he commanded him, being yet alive, to be brought to the fire, and to be fried in the pan. And as the vapor of the pan was for a good space dispersed, they exhorted one another with the mother to die manfully, saying thus, "Yahuwah Elohim looked upon us, and in truth has comfort in us, as Moses in his song, which witness to their faces declared, saying, and he shall be comforted in his servants. So when the first was dead, after this number, they brought the second to make him a mocking stock. And when they had pulled off the skin of his head with the hair, they asked him, will you eat before you are punished in every member of your body? But he answered in his own tongue and said, no. Wherefore he also received the next torment in order as the former did. And as he was at the last gasp, he said, you, like a fury, take us out of this present life, but the King of the world shall raise us up, who have died for his laws unto everlasting life. After him was the third made a laughing stock. And when he was required, he put out his tongue, and that right soon, holding forth his hand manfully, and said courageously, these I had from heaven, and for his laws I despised them, and from him I hope to receive them again. Insomuch that the king and they that were with him marveled at the young man's courage, for that he had nothing regarding the pains. Now when this man was dead also, they tormented and mangled the fourth in like manner. So when he was ready to die, he said thus, it is good being put to death by men, to look for hope from Yahuwah, to be raised up again by him. As for thee, you shall not have a resurrection of life. These men knew that they had a promise of everlasting life if they guarded the commandments of Yahuwah Elohim. Every single one of them systematically butchered and cooked. Yet they would not turn from Yahuwah's commandment. When the youngest was presented to the king promised him that he would make him a happy man, very rich, if he would just eat a little piece of the pork. But this young man refused. And we know what happened to him was the same as what happened to his brothers. The courage of these men to stare death in the face, but know that Yahuwah Elohim would give them everlasting life. And surely the mother also died. And they all knew and they spoke of an everlasting covenant, a covenant that Yahuwah had made with them for everlasting life. And they believed that they would come up again. Just imagine this young boy when he stuck out his hands and he says to the king, these I have been given from heaven, but for his laws I despise them, and I hope to receive them again.
In the midst of this great tragedy, Yahuwah had not forgotten his people, but would rather raise up for them saviors in the form of a family who would serve him with their heart, mind, and being and lead his people to victory against the Syrio-Greeks. It all began when Matithyahu, who is called Mattathias, a Kohen or priest who lived in the rural setting of Modi'in, was asked by a government official to come near the altar that was set up there and make sacrifice to idols. He responded to the official, I and my sons and my brothers walk in the covenant of our fathers. Elohim forbid that we should forsake the laws and the ordinances. We will not obey the king's words to go from our religion, either on the right hand or the left. After speaking these words, a Hellenized Jew came forward to make sacrifice. But when Matithyahu the Kohen saw it, he burned with great zeal and wrath, slaying him, and then slaying the governor who was sent to oversee the events. After this, he stirred up his countrymen, saying, whoever is zealous for the Torah, the law, and maintains the covenant, let him follow me. He then took refuge in the mountains of Yehuda. Matithyahu and his 5 sons, Yehuchanan, Shimon, Eleazar, Yehunathan, and Yehuda, led a rebellion against Antiochus. These men were called Ha-Maccabean, meaning the sledgehammers, coming from the Aramaic word Maccabah. Some say that this word may come from the term Maccab Yahu, meaning the designated ones of Yahuwah. Matithyahu was an elderly man who passed away of an old age, leaving his son Yehuda HaMaccabee the hammer as general of the revolt.
He led the Hasidians into guerrilla war, many times defeating the generals Antiochus had commissioned to deal with the uprising. He led the children of Israel to 8 very strategic victories against the Syro-Greeks. Yehuda refused amnesty and reconquered Yehuda in 164 BC, and he was able to tear down the altar of Zeus and reconsecrate the temple of Yahuwah only 3 years after its desecration. The Maccabean victory against the Syro-Greeks was indeed a miracle from Yahuwah Elohim, who delivered his people with a mighty right hand. And we see that Yahuwah did this many times in the books of Maccabees by actually sending malachim, which are called heavenly messengers. People call them angels, but that comes from the Greek term, so we will not use that. But the term malachim, the messengers of Yahuwah, came and fought for the children of Israel on the battlefield and could be visibly seen. So the children of Israel knew, obviously, this was a spiritual battle, not just a physical battle. But then again, the ancient Hebrews really didn't differentiate between the two elements as much as the Greeks did. They knew that this physical world and this physical existence was all spiritual and it was all tied in together. But anyway, they knew that this was a spiritual battle, and the forces of darkness had come upon Israel to wipe out their seed forever and to oppress them with the demonic plagues of wickedness and violence and corruption and the abomination of desolation and all of these things that came upon them. But the children of Israel saw a great light in the redemption of Yahuwah during this time when he saved his people, he redeemed them. And though Antiochus Epiphanes came upon the Maccabees with elephants and chariots and armed men by the thousands outnumbering his people, Yahuwah saved them, and he will do so even again when the armies surround Jerusalem, just as the prophets have spoken, that Jerusalem will be a cup of trembling in those days, and that all the nations will surround Jerusalem in those days. So we look for this to be echoed in history. So I give you words of courage from Yehuda HaMaccabee, from the sledgehammer himself, from the mighty general of Yahuwah who led his people to victory. And Maccabees, 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 19. For the victory of battle stands not in the multitude of an army, but strength comes from the heavens. They come against us in much pride and iniquity to destroy us and our wives and our children and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws. Wherefore Yahuwah himself will overthrow them before our face. And as for you, be not afraid of them. I'm calling on the Maccabees of this last generation. Hear my voice. Hear the words that I'm saying to you. This time that is coming upon the world will be a dark time, a time of great tribulation like the world has never seen up until this time. It is time for mighty men, righteous men to stand up. It is time for men who have been sitting on the fence to get off the fence and serve Yahuwah. It is time to dedicate yourself to Yahuwah. It is time to hear the voice of Yahuwah and know that you are going to face persecution. You are going to face all these things. They will outlaw the Torah. They will make it a sin for a man to live according to the righteousness that Yahuwah has described, to keep the Sabbath and all these things. It will happen again. They will persecute us. It happens even now. It happens even now. The time has come. We cannot allow the iniquity to continue to rise. We have to take a stand. All you Maccabees out there, hear this word. Know that the victory comes from Yahuwah alone. It does not come with a host of an army. Now, 1 Maccabees chapter 4, we read about the rededication of the temple. Because we know that Yehuda was able to come into the temple and to purify it and to prepare it and to dedicate it to Yahuwah. And this was a very important time because this took place 3 years later to fulfill the words of the scriptures that all had to be. He was able to do this before all of Israel to encourage them to know that Yahuwah lives and that there is no other and that he gives a victory in Israel. And this in itself was the great miracle, that the abomination of desolation was purged, idolatry removed, this ambiguous idea of the Most High who was carved out in an image form, destroyed. No more of that Jupiter, of that so-called Holy Father of the Greeks and later the Romans. No more of this ambiguous deity. But now the name of Yahweh would be called upon again. As we even read in the Talmud that the Hasmoneans, who were the Maccabees, enforced that the name of Yahweh should be used again at this time when they conquered the temple. And so we know that this is important to call on the name of Yahweh for the rededication of not just a physical temple, but the altar of our hearts. To prepare our lives as a burnt sacrifice, an oblation, a sweet-smelling savor to Yahweh, that we may be Hanukkah, that we may be dedicated, rededicated to the Most High. It says in 1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 52, "Now on the 25th day, or the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month of Kaslu or Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up betimes in the morning, and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar." They had to build a new altar. They couldn't use that old profane altar any longer. They had to build a new altar. And they did offerings upon it. It says, upon the new altar of burnt offerings which they had made. Look at that time and what day the heathen had profaned it. Even in that was it dedicated with songs and citherns and harps and cymbals. So they dedicated the altar at the same time period that it had been profaned years previous. And they did so with music and gladness. They rededicated the altar of Yahweh. Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising Yahweh of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication, which is the word Hanukkah, in the Torah. We read about it, remember, at the beginning of the lesson. This is the Hanukkah of the altar in the day that it was anointed. This is the dedication of the altar in the day that it was anointed. And these men were doing a Torah commandment by rededicating the altar as it had been previously done. It says they rededicated the altar 8 days and offered burnt offerings with gladness and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. Now, why 8 days? This is actually a very deep answer. So follow me and listen carefully. The scriptural answer can be found in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 at the dedication of the temple that Solomon dedicated originally to Yahweh when he, the first to build the temple of Yahweh, dedicated it. It says in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 8, "And Shlomo or Solomon at that time observed the festival 7 days." Now this is the festival of Sukkot, which is tabernacles. He observed the festival. "And all Yisrael with him, a very great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the Wadi of Mitzrayim. And on the 8th day, they held an assembly, for they performed the dedication of the altar 7 days and the festival 7 days." So Shlomo or Solomon strategically marked the festival of Sukkot or tabernacles, which is prophetic, a time that shows that Yahweh will tabernacle with his people yet again. But he chose this time period to dedicate the temple of Yahweh. They kept the festival 7 days and they dedicated the altar 7 days. So they did Hanukkah and Sukkot there at the same time period. And it says that it was 8 days because we know that the 8th day of Sukkot is a solemn assembly time. It is a time when the Torah is read, a time of rejoicing. It is a time of gatherings, so many things that happen on the great 8th day of the festival. Okay, so this great 8th day was tied into the dedication of the altar as well, because they're doing offerings and they had just initiated this altar to Yahuwah Elohim for the house of Yahuwah. His presence came into that place, accepted the offering, sent fire, and this is very important to understand because Yahuwah, he gave a great miracle at the dedication of this altar and at this time period. He also did a great miracle at the time of the dedicating of the altar during Ezra's time that we read about in the book of Maccabees. He also did a great miracle at this time. We'll read about that in just a moment, but it's very important to understand that the original reason here for the 8 days of the dedication is because this is what happened at the original time that the temple was dedicated to Yahuwah. So it's 8 days because of Sukkot and because of the dedication of the altar took 7 days, okay? So it's very important. So people say, well, why not 7 days? Well, let's read a little further. We're going to actually go and read verse 59 of 1 Maccabees chapter 3. It says, moreover, Judas or Yehuda and his brothers with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days from the 25th day of the month of Keslu or Kislev with mirth and gladness. So great celebration. A great celebration would be done during this time period. But when we read in the book of Maccabees, we see that the original reason that this was done for 8 days and not just the 7 days for the dedicating of the altar was because in the 9th month, when they rededicated the altar, the Israelites had not been keeping the festivals, especially not tabernacles, because tabernacles would literally require you to set up booths. So for an entire army in the mountains of Yehuda who were trying to hide and do guerrilla warfare against the Greeks, setting up tabernacles and sleeping in them and all that was not very feasible. Now, I'm sure they had some type of camp strategies, but we also know that they stayed in caves because we know that region and we know what they were doing. But the point is that it wasn't very feasible for the entire nation to just go camp out, because previously we saw that Israelites even died on the Sabbath day because they wouldn't fight. They wouldn't even fight back on the Sabbath. But eventually, they realized, we can't keep getting killed on the Sabbath. We're going to have to fight even on the Sabbath day. So the festivals couldn't even be kept properly. Plus, all males were supposed to go to Jerusalem, to the temple for the Feast of Sukkot. So all the males obviously aren't going to go there when the Greeks are occupying this space and they're killing everybody who's keeping the Torah. They're hiding in the mountains. So when they get there and they know that they missed the festival by 2 months, they want to celebrate Sukkot again. They know that it's late. They know it's not the real time, and they're not going to make this the official time of Sukkot. They're not doing anything like that. But what they're saying is they're saying that we have an opportunity to start anew. If we keep Sukkot now, we can get back on track in the time of the spring for Passover. We can do all this, and this would be a great time of celebration for our people, a great revival for our people, that we could celebrate the experience of Yahuwah at his temple. And what better way to celebrate the temple than the actual Feast of Tabernacles, which was always in link with this temple. According to Solomon's dedicating during that time period, the actual festival of Sukkot, he dedicated the altar. So because of all these reasons, the Maccabees decided, we're going to celebrate Sukkot. It's a couple months late. We couldn't do it. We know we're not doing it exactly right, but nonetheless, we want to have a celebration. We're so excited because a great revival has happened. Okay, so these are the reasons. The real reason is because and we read this again in the Maccabees, it tells us specifically that they kept Sukkot then. That's what they did. They kept the Feast of Tabernacles at that time. They knew it wasn't the right time, but again, they were so excited and wanted to celebrate Yahuwah that they did this. And so Yehuda and the Maccabees promoted the idea that year after year, this event should be commemorated because Yahuwah had brought a great redemption for the children of Israel. So that's the real reason. Now, there is a scroll called the Scroll of Antiochus that the Yemenite Jews preserve even to this day. And it's called Megillat Antiochus. And it says in the Megillat Antiochus, after this, the sons of Israel went up to the temple and rebuilt its gates and purified the temple from the dead bodies and from the defilement. And they sought after pure olive oil to light the lamps therewith, but could not find any except one bowl that was sealed with the signet ring of the high priest from the days of Samuel or Shemuel the prophet. And they knew that it was pure. There was in it enough to light the lamps for one day, but Yahuwah, the Elohim of heaven, whose name dwells there, put therein his barakah, his blessing, and they were able to light it from 8 days. So they were able to get just a little bit of olive oil that should have lasted only a day to last for 8 days, according to this document. Therefore, the sons of Hashmoni made this covenant and took upon themselves a solemn vow, they and the sons of Israel, all of them, to publish amongst the sons of Israel. And they did. They wrote to Israelites that were in Egypt and various places who were not in the land of Israel at this time, the great things that took place. Matter of fact, that's how 2nd Maccabees even begins. It's a letter to other Jews about the events that took place here. And it says, they published it among the sons of Israel, that they might observe these 8 days of joy and honor as the days of the feast written in the book of the law. So in other words, it's again saying as the 8 days of the feast written in the book of the law. In other words, Sukkot, because that's what they did. Now, they're not saying keep Sukkot, because no Jews, even to this day, call Hanukkah a Sabbath or say their Sabbath or say a Sukkot or anything like that. Matter of fact, a lot of Jews today don't even realize there's a connection between Sukkot and Hanukkah, because they only know about the 8 days of the oil. That's the primary message, is the 8 days of the oil. It says that they might observe these days as the feast written in the book of the law, in other words, for 8 days, to light in them so as to make known to those who come after them that their Elohim wrought for them salvation from heaven. So there's a message of this hidden oil. And this is a picture of Yahushua the Messiah, because Yahushua the Messiah is sealed with Yahuwah's name, the Most High, the Elohim of Israel. He is the high priest. He wears it upon his head on the crown in the heavens, which he is in now. He wears that name. So it is very important. He's sealed, and he's also the hidden oil. The oil that nobody knows or realizes. People keep missing, especially the Israelites, because the scriptures tell us that they would not receive the Messiah fully, that many would, but not the entire nation, until the restoration of all things. When Yahushua is revealed at his coming, many will then turn to him and be saved. So this is very important to understand these things. But the point is that this is a picture of him, the hidden oil. It's also a picture of the 144,000 that we read of that will be in the last days, Israelites, 12,000 from every tribe, sealed with Yahuwah's name in their forehead. And they are filled with what? The oil, which is what? Symbolic of the Ruach HaKodesh, the set apart spirit, the what people call, they call it the Holy Spirit. We call it the Ruach HaKodesh. It is the set apart spirit of Yahuwah, Elohim, the wind and breath of Yahuwah even is what Ruach implies. So this is very important, because the oil is symbolic of the anointing, is symbolic of the Ruach, it's symbolic of all these things. So this idea is very, very important. But that miracle alone would not have been the reason to celebrate Hanukkah. That's not enough, because you see, Yahuwah created everything out of nothing. So to multiply oil is a simple thing. He even did that in the days of Eliyahu, who is called Elijah the prophet. He did that in the days of Elisha. He multiplied the oil. So we know that multiplying the oil is a small thing. Even Yahushua was able to multiply from just a small amount of loaves and fish, enough to feed thousands. So that reason is just not enough. The real miracle, though, is the restoration of the covenant, the restoration of the house of Yahuwah, the restoration of pure worship, the restoration of calling upon the name, a revival of Torah, a revival of the instructions of the Most High, taking a stand against wickedness, against darkness. Yahushua said, I am the light of the world. So he is the light. We know that Yeshayahu says about the Messiah that the nations will see a great light. Yahushua is the light. He's a picture of the hidden oil. He's also a picture of the menorah, of the candlestick of Yahuwah, which literally, not even candles, is an oil lamp. But this is how people know it, this 7-branched lampstand of Yahuwah, the menorah. This is a picture of Yahushua also. He is the high priest. Also, remember that. So remember when the high priest came into the temple, he didn't know there was oil. He found some. He found some, and it was that hidden treasure that would last and to be pure before him. And this is a picture of Yahushua when he comes and finds his servants doing the will of Yahuwah, and they will be that hidden treasure in his kingdom. They were hidden to the world, but they will be the treasure of the kingdom. Very important. He is also the Lion of the tribe of Yehudah, obviously, which Judah the Maccabee was a great military general, but what Yahushua will do when he comes is greater. And just like the Malachim assisted Yehudah, the Malachim of the heavens, the messengers of the heavens, are coming with Yahushua when he comes to destroy the wickedness from off the face of the earth. Very important. So Josephus also mentions this time of Hanukkah, and he calls it the Festival of Lights. But he gives a different reason. He doesn't mention the 8 days of the oil at all. He says, I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that from there was the name given to that festival, the Festival of Lights. So he was saying because a great liberty appeared, that must have been a reason. He doesn't mention the oil. For this reason and other reasons, many people don't even believe the miracle of the oil took place. I do believe it was a historical event. There's just too much evidence that kind of pushes in that direction. But either way, that is not even the major significance. Again, the major significance was the purifying of the altar and the reinstitution of true worship, of the true Elohim, the true Father, the true Most High of the heavens, who is Yahuwah, who has a name, and it was called upon. The restoration of the name is what we should be celebrating this Hanukkah. That is what we should be doing. That's what we should be doing. Understanding the history, reading the history year after year. These are important. What did Yahushua say about Hanukkah? After all, when you read in the scriptures, you won't find Hanukkah anywhere except for in John chapter 10 in the Brit Hadashah, what is called the Renewed Testament or Renewed Covenant, literally. But in John chapter 10, Yahuchanan chapter 10, verse 22, it says, at that time, the Hanukkah came to be. Now, your translation may say the Feast of Dedication, but the word dedication is Hanukkah. So the Feast of Dedication was the Hanukkah. So the time of Hanukkah came to be in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, and it was winter, and Yahushua was walking in the set apart place in the porch of Solomon, so that the Yahudim surrounded him and said to him, how long do you keep us in suspense? If you are Hamashiach, the Messiah, the Anointed, say to us plainly. Yahushua answered them, I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, again, the restoration of the name of Yahuwah, because he proclaimed it. Yahushua proclaimed the name of Yahuwah to his brothers specifically, and it says the works that I do in my Father's name. That means healing the blind, healing the lepers, raising the dead. Those works he did, what? In his Father's name. They bear witness concerning me. But you do not believe, because you are not of my sheep, as I said to you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give them everlasting life, and they shall by no means ever perish, and no one shall snatch them out of my hand. Now, Yahushua is at the porch of Solomon during the time of Hanukkah, and this is the message that he's speaking of, everlasting life. And your mind immediately goes back to those martyrs, those young men who said to the king that they would die for the covenant, and they put out their tongue so that the king could cut it off, and they weren't even fazed by the pain, and they stuck out their hands and they said, these I have been given from heaven. I will receive them again because I will raise up, but you will have no resurrection. They knew there was a resurrection. Yahushua was preaching the message of the resurrection in honor of these martyrs and the slain who died during this time period. He is there specifically to honor them and to honor the time of Hanukkah, and he is there for this reason. Many people try to say today, because they think they understand the scriptures, that he just happened to be at Solomon's porch during this time period because he was often there. They don't even know the scriptures. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. How do we know? Well, we go to John chapter 7. Verse 1. It says, and after this, Yahushua was walking in Galilee, for he did not wish to walk in Yehuda because the Yahudim were seeking to kill him. This is just 3 chapters before he goes to Solomon's porch. In Jerusalem, he's saying here, he didn't even want to go to Jerusalem anymore because the Jews were trying to kill him. And we see in John chapter 7, he needed to go there for the Feast of Tabernacles for Sukkot. And that was mandatory. And he went up, but he did in secret. He hid in secret during the festival of Sukkot. He didn't go to Solomon's porch and make any loud proclamations during the very Feast of Tabernacles, a commanded feast, a commanded Torah feast. He hid as in secret. But then 3 chapters later for Hanukkah, he boldly comes to the porch of Solomon and makes this proclamation in front of everybody that he would give those who believe in him everlasting life. The light of the world makes this declaration to the children of Israel, and he tells the Pharisees that they're not even of his sheep. Many Pharisees believed in Yahushua, and they followed Yahushua. Many of them, we read about elders of Israel who did, like Nicodemus and people like that. Nectamon, different men, Joseph of Arimathea, leaders of the people, believed in Yahushua. We see this clearly. But the problem he had with the Pharisees is he says that the Pharisees add to the commandment traditions of men and make the commandments of Yahuwah of no effect. And they've even done this with Hanukkah. You see, for Hanukkah now, when they light the menorah, it's a tradition that wasn't even started by the Pharisees, but before Pharisees ever even existed. It was started by the Hashmonim or the Maccabees, by the priests. It was a law during that time. The priest made it a law that people would, celebrate this time period and acknowledge the great victory. And they did so, and Yahushua came 150 or actually 160 some years after this event. He comes on the scene just 160 years. This event's still kind of fresh. I mean, that's not that long, actually. And so he comes on the scene and he begins to preach this message, and he comes boldly during this time period because Hanukkah is a picture of the last days, and Yahushua wanted us to know that. It's not just there for no reason. And people say, well, it's not a commanded feast, so we don't observe it, or this or that, or, just because it's not in the Torah. But Yahushua himself showed up at Solomon's porch, risking his life. Just 3 chapters earlier, again, he didn't want to do that during the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot. But yet he did it for the dedication. Why? Again, because he knew his students would search this matter out diligently, and they would begin to tie in the understanding of the last days and what would transpire. That Hanukkah is a foreshadowing. All the persecution and everything that took place, it's a foreshadowing of the New World Order, of this end times beast system. Prepare yourselves, get yourselves ready. That's what the message is. He says he will give them everlasting life. Now again, people say, well, it's not commanded in the Torah, so we shouldn't even talk about it. We shouldn't acknowledge it. This is what some people who are extremists say. And again, the Pharisees, they've made it a commandment. When they light the menorah, they say that this is a commandment from Yahuwah. They say, Baruch atah Yahuwah, Eloheinu melech haolam. And they call it a literal mitzvah. They say it is a mitzvah to light the lamps. A commandment that Yahuwah has given. But this isn't true. Again, they've stretched their authority too far. And Yahushua warned about this very thing, calling things a commandment which were simply traditions. A tradition in of itself is not necessarily an evil thing. Yahushua had traditions, it says in the scriptures. As was his tradition, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. But guess what? It doesn't say to go to a synagogue in the Torah because they didn't exist. It didn't exist. You went to the tabernacle, you went to places like this, and you studied with the Levites. They didn't have synagogues. So that was a tradition. He had traditions. As long as a tradition doesn't go against the covenant, then it's okay. But when a man says a tradition is the covenant, then that is when you have added to the Torah. And Yahuwah says, you shall not add to the Torah, you shall not take from the Torah, but yet they do this. So we have to be careful. But we need to honor this time. Men with wisdom would know and search this matter out and honor this time. How? By lighting lights and all these things? Well, if you want to, you can. But the number one message is to purify the altar of your heart, to honor Yahuwah with pure worship, to get your life in order. Study the book of the Maccabees and understand how it is relevant to you at this time, and encourage other men of Yahuwah to be men of Yahuwah, to stand up for righteousness. And do those first. And actually, before all that, make sure you are a student of Yahushua, the Messiah, the anointed one of Israel, and call upon the name of Yahuwah. After all, it was reinstated at this time. So it's not just about this idea of lighting lights. It's about much more. Be a light to the world. Be a light to the world. You want to know how to celebrate Hanukkah? You play with dreidels and give out gifts and cute things like that. Well, I mean, there's like cute little elements that have been added to make Hanukkah more fun because Christmas, seemed like such a fun time, and Hanukkah happens somewhere around there about we need a fun time for Israelites too. This isn't about fun, It does say in the book to rejoice and to be glad, and so we should rejoice and be glad for the victory. So we need to not lose sight of the rejoicing because that was a part of it, to rejoice for the victory. So, again, it's okay, for some things to happen in Hanukkah if a person wants to give a small gift. And I know people are going to have a problem with saying that. But even during the time of Purim, when Esther was able to bring a great redemption, her name was Hadassah actually, when she was able to bring a great redemption for her people, they gave gifts. It's just a natural thing. People are so excited, but this cannot compete with Christmas. You cannot make it that. If it's that in your mind, if you're trying to use it in that way, then you are erring from the truth, and the truth isn't in you, because Christmas is pagan, and you shouldn't have anything to do with the pagan ways. Do not do this. Do not do this. Be extremely careful. All right. Now, again, people say we shouldn't do it because it's not commanded. But then in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 19, it says, "Thus said Yahuwah of hosts, the fast of the 4th, and the fast of the 5th, and the fast of the 7th, and the fast of the 10th months are to be joy and gladness and pleasant, appointed times for the house of Yehuda, and they shall love the truth and the peace and the shalom." This is talking about the renewed kingdom. And this saying that these fasts, which are fasts that aren't commanded in the Torah, but are actually kept by the Jews today, these fasts are going to be appointed times, moedim. But people say, well, you know, I only keep the ones that are listed in Leviticus chapter 23. Hey, that's fine. Actually, that's the way I look at it as well in many ways. But you also have to understand that there are fasts that will be made appointed times, and there will be times of celebration in the coming kingdom. Surely the great king will reflect on the history of Israel during these times of the time of the reign of Yahuwah when the Messiah comes. Surely these things will happen just as the prophecies say, so that the children of Israel can remember their history and see that Yahuwah did send the Messiah to rule and reign. It only makes sense. You have to keep scripture in a context, and the scriptural context lets us know that there will be a time when these fasts will still be celebrated, but with great rejoicing, and they will be called appointed times. Okay. Yeshayahu chapter 2 verse 2 says, "It shall be in the latter times that the mountains of the house of Yahuwah is established on the top of the mountains and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. And many people shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of Yahuwah, to the house of the Elohim of Yaakov, and let him teach us his ways, and let us walk in his paths. For out of Zion comes forth the Torah and the word of Yahuwah from Jerusalem." So we know that the house of Yahuwah shall be established yet again. One other reason to celebrate this time is we know that Yahushua said in the book of Matthew chapter 24 that the abomination that lays waste will be set up again. And then he says, "Let him who reads understand." So we have to understand that he spoke of a time where this will happen again, and it did. It happened under Emperor Titus. In 70 of this common era, he marched against Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. But beforehand, he put up symbols of Zeus and put up an abomination of desolation, just like Antiochus did. But he was successful, and there were no Maccabees to rise up to stop this revolt. The temple was completely destroyed, and so it is to this day. We know that years later, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, when Bar Kokhba, the false messiah of the Jews, rose up and he went against the Romans, that the Romans completely destroyed the Yahudim, just about, just utterly destroyed them, and put up on the Temple Mount and a temple to Jupiter. Yet again, this happened again in history. So this abomination of desolation continues to happen. It continues to transpire. So we need to prepare and understand the historical realities of Hanukkah, because we should understand that this will happen again. How do we know? Because he said during those times, "Let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains." Well, they did in 70 AD, just 40 years after he makes this statement. The prophecy comes true. Titus comes. He brings the abomination of desolation. Jews flee to the mountain just like they did. And then he says that great tribulation will come like the world has never seen. This is all in Matthew 24. But then he says, "Then shall appear the sign of the coming of the Son of Man in the heavens with the messengers of the heavens, and that he will go to the four corners and gather his elect and bring them to Israel, and that the Messiah will rule and reign, and he will destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem." And this has not happened yet. So we know, therefore, that we should understand this. This is for the wise out there. This isn't for everybody. There are people out there who are going to criticize the whole concept of Hanukkah and say, well, this and that. I am not saying that you have to keep Hanukkah. It's not commanded. But if you are wise, then you will honor this time period by studying the Maccabees and getting your heart ready and your life ready and your understanding pure before your Creator. Yahuwah be with you and keep you in Yahushua's name. Amen.